Now that we've completed our front and back draft in size 4 and we have our sleeve to match, what we're going to do is we're going to cut all of these out in muslin fabric. And then we're going to sew these up and do a test fit back to our dress form. The reason why we use muslin fabric is because it doesn't have any finishes on it, no colors, no prints, nothing. And it's just a basic plain weave fabric. Ideally, everything that you're going to use in muslin will probably eventually end up in the trash can. So you just want to have some very inexpensive fabric to work with while you are designing and building brand new patterns that are going to eventually become master slopers and doing any kind of experimental draping on the dress form. The muslin fabric itself has kind of a dingy yellow look to it. Some people would say it's even kind of like a vanilla color. And the reason being is this is just the raw color before they do any kind of a dipping, dyeing, bleaching, anything like that. The muslin fabric that you're going to want to purchase, ideally you would be getting what's called a draping muslin. And the draping muslin kind of has the weave isn't as tight. It's a little more what we would say open weave. And this is easier for you when you're drawing lines with a pencil or pulling with a pin, and you're going to learn these techniques as we go through the process. Now, if you've done any draping or pattern making, you would know there's a lot of emphasis on the grain line and the balance lines, and everything is perfectly squared up. And then when you do a test fit back to your dress form and back to your client, you're always checking to make sure that the grains are staying totally perpendicular and all of the horizontal balance lines are parallel to the ground. So for all the time that you spent developing your patterns and getting them just right, if you were to now just cut them on some fabric and then put it on your dress form, you might have a fitting issue and you're going to think it's your patterns, but really what it was your muslin was off grain. So what we need to do is we need to take this muslin and make sure that all of the grains inside of the muslin are totally squared up before you cut out your pattern pieces. The muslin fabric itself, it kind of takes a little bit of abuse. You'll see that it'll be on giant rolls. And if you work in a design house, you'll see where rolls will be propped up against the wall or laying flat on the ground. Or some people will take, 12 yards off and then just crunch it up and push it to a corner and just use bits at a time. And so all these different ways that muslin's being stored and handled is pulling it off grain. At one point in time though, this muslin, it was on a loom and all the threads were perfectly squared up, and then you were going for the cross grains and everything's getting tampered back into place. So it did get produced perfectly. It's just over time all of the grains get a little bit pulled and twisted. So what we're going to do is we're going to learn to take off a piece of muslin the size that we're going to need, and then I'm going to show you how to block it and get all the grains perfectly squared back up again. Now taking a look at your pattern pieces, the grains that are going vertical, so from the neck down towards the waist, this is vertical. That you're going to want to have those to be the threads that are tight so they don't stretch out over time. And this is going to be your length grain. On the muslin that you have, the easiest way to find which direction is the length grain is, for instance, if you were to order 3 yards in length, that's the length grain. And then how wide is the fabric? So for instance, if this was 44 inches wide or 62 inches wide, that would be the cross grain. So the length grain is what we're concerned about at first. Now here I have some muslin where it's already got pieces that have been cut out of this. What I don't want to do is I don't want to lay out my pattern piece, take some scissors and sit here and just cut out a square. If I do that, all the edges of the square that I just cut are uneven. We want to have them to be perfect all the way down to the very last thread inside the grain. We want to have a perfect straight line going across the width and into the length. Now, one of the cool things about plain weave fabric is it only has the grains going like a basket weave. So what I can do is I can tear this all the way across. And when you tear the plain weave fabric, it's tearing exactly in a perfect straight line all the way down to the very last thread inside of there. So if you were to take a magnifying glass and come look at this, the very next thread that you see on here is the beginning of this piece of fabric. And then that works in both directions. So this was the width of my fabric. I can clip it here, and this is going in the length of my fabric. So exact same thing. So we're going to use this to our advantage. Now what I want to do is I want to cut out this pattern piece. And I want to block out a piece of muslin, obviously, that's a little bit bigger than this. I'm going to open this up so it's a single layer, and I'm cutting this out just as a single layer. Now, taking a look at this fabric in particular, this piece of muslin was so wide on the bolt that someone had cut it in half so it's easier to handle. So for instance, on this side, there's the selve edge, and then on this side, it's a cut edge. Now what I need to do is, I can't reference this cut edge. I need to clip it and then tear that cut edge off. Now that I've torn this edge off, I know that I can trust that this is going to be a perfect straight line. I'm going to lay out my pattern piece so I have like 2 inches extra from center front. The top edge here has already been torn off. We just did that. So far we've torn this edge and we've torn this edge. Now we want to come down in here and we want to find enough room to fit the pattern piece in. And I'm going to tear in this direction. And then I want to find enough room here to get the other side of the pattern piece. Clip that and start tearing it down. And then I want to find a spot where both of these will come together perfectly. Right at a corner, and that way I'm not wasting any other fabric that I have to. So here we have our piece of muslin that will fit for cutting out this pattern piece. Now if we take a closer look at this fabric, you can see some of the edges are curling under, and then edges are falling apart, threads coming off of this. So right after you tear it, there's a little bit of work that needs to be done so we can clean this up. What I want to do is, along each of the 4 sides, I want to be able to take one thread and I want to see it come off the full distance. So if you find some threads where you peel them off and they come up shorter than the full distance, then go and find another one until you can finally get that one thread that will go the full distance. And then do this on all 4 sides. So now I've gone through and on all 4 sides, I was able to peel off one thread that goes the full distance. The reason why that's important is now I know that the very next thread on here is the actual piece of fabric, and it's true to the shape and size of the fabric. Now I'm going to prepare another piece here for my back pattern piece. This is the side of the fabric that has the selvage. If you're not sure what the selvage is, it's the edge of the fabric where it's got a super tight weave to it, so this will not fray and fall apart when it's in transit, moving around and going from the mill out to the customer. This selvage, though, will not allow you to block out the fabric, so we need to get rid of that. So what you want to do is, if you'll notice, so for instance on mine it's about 3/4 of an inch thick, and I need to come in and clip just above that. So here I'm going to come in, I'm going to clip for the length, and here I'm clipping for the width. I got those to meet down here in the middle. Now something else that you could do is you can snap this out to get the threads to fall off quicker. And then once you've done that, go ahead and check and make sure. You can pull one thread off all 4 sides, and that one last thread goes the full distance. Now for me, on this muslin, I tore off the front from this side, and I tore off the back from that side. And now I can come in here and find where the sleeve will go. And you'll notice it's a little bit uneven. I don't want to cut down and cut around or anything like that. What I need to do is, if I want to continue this, I need to clip it, continue that down to where now I can tear into the width . Now for me personally, I like to come back to my original piece of muslin and just clean this up a little bit. Also, if you're working at a design house and there's a lot of people using the same yardage, it's just kind of a polite thing to come back and clean up these edges for them. And then when I'm folding my fabric back, this is the clean area that I've never used before. I'm going to start by rolling that upwards. And then this is the area where I've recently used it. I like to have that so it'll flop out first, because sometimes you just need a quick little piece or something, or you want to know exactly how much you have left. It's easier to see when this area here is at the end of the roll. The next thing we want to do is we want to press this. So let's turn on your iron to the highest setting possible. And then for steam, you want to have lots of steam. And inside of here, you want to have lots of water. Now when I take a closer look at my fabric, some of the edges are nice and flat. Some of the edges are curling under or have really severe wrinkles on here. And the first thing I want to do is I want to take care of these edges. So anything that was curling under, flip your muslin over so now it's curling up. And what we could do is we can come in here and I'm going to flatten those back down. Once I've flattened out the edges, I can also start to come into the muslin itself and get rid of some of the wrinkles. And then once all of the edges look good, I can come into the middle of the muslin and go ahead and get this pressed clean as well. Now here on the tabletop, what I want to do is I want to let this just cool off a little bit. Now let's take a closer look at this muslin. We want this to be perfectly squared up. Because it's fabric and because it's been handled a lot, right now it's not square. So for instance, if I bring a square in here and I'm trying to line the corners up inside there, it's not working. So if I square up with this top edge here, it's not matching with this edge here. So this is what we mean when we talk about we need to block our muslin. So we want to block this out to get it perfectly squared up to how it was originally when it came off of the loom at the mill. The first thing we need to do is we need to determine in which direction, what's incorrect and how are we going to correct that. That's what we need to do. So what I want you to do is the longer edges of this is the length grain. And I want you to find the middle of the length grain. So we're going to go ahead and just fold this in half, take out a pencil, and put a light mark right here in the middle. And then we're going to come over to the other length grain, and we'll do the same thing. We'll fold this in half, find the middle. So you know that in general, this is the center of this piece of fabric. Now if I come in here with a square ruler and I'm lining up with one edge, and as I bring the ruler over to this edge, you can see that it's uneven. And the same thing would happen if I follow along this edge here. You could see it's uneven down in this area, and then of course the other corners as well. Now a way that you can check it is, remember we put a little mark right here and here at the center of this piece? If you were to bring that mark and come and line it up with this one here, so the marks are on top of each other and the edges are touching, you can see that it's uneven here and underneath here as well. Then let's say I wanted this edge all along here to be parallel with this edge. So I move my fabric, I get them parallel. You'll notice that the two marks don't line up. The edges out here is uneven, as well as over here. Now here's what you're going to do. So we need to have these two marks on top of each other when this edge here, so this is the length grain edge, when those are parallel, we want those two marks on top of each other. Now if you take a look at it, this mark is shifting that way. So if I draw this in, you can see that one's there, this one's underneath. And we need this one to shift going in this direction. If you come over here, you can see also that this edge is coming up short. And so this edge also needs to shift in that direction. What's happening underneath here is the opposite. We need this mark to travel that direction. And the edge of the fabric here is coming up short, so it needs to also travel in that direction. Now the easiest way to do this is you want to grab the corners that are coming up short. So if I move along here, this corner's coming up short, so I'm going to grab it. And if I come along here, the corner underneath is coming up short, so I'm going to grab that. Now when I unfold this, I'm holding it on the bias grain. And what I can do is I can pull this bias grain, and what's happening is this mark right here is traveling that way, and this mark right here is traveling that way because I'm pulling them. And you could even see, keep your eye on this one, it's traveling towards my hand over here. Keep your eye on this mark, and it's traveling towards my hand over here. So this is what we want to do with the grain of the fabric. Now you don't want to just stretch on the bias and you think you're done, because this corner over here also needs to migrate. Even though we fixed the first half, we need to also fix the second half. So watch what I'm going to do is my hands are going to start traveling towards this corner while I'm still pulling on the bias in this direction. So this hand is pulling, this hand is my anchor. So I'm going to move my anchor up and my pulling hand up, and I'll pull this. And I'm anchoring this a little higher, and I'll pull that. And I'll anchor this a little higher, and I'll pull that. And here I'm getting this last little bit of the corner to come towards me. Now we need to do the same thing down here. We've basically already fixed the first half by pulling on the bias. Now we want to fix this bottom corner. So I'm going to switch. Now this hand is the anchor and this hand is pulling. So remember, these were the corners we were pulling on. I'm going to anchor it here and I'm going to pull it there. I'll anchor it here, pull it there, anchor it here. And you could even see this corner moving over this direction. Now you're going to see there's a lot of bumps and warbles in your fabric. If right now I were to just push this and flatten it back out, all I'm doing is I'm just putting it back to where it was. So don't do that. Let these bumps stay where they are because all of those grains are shifting. What we're going to do is we're going to carefully come back and just check. Now if I line up the two length grain edges, are the marks on top of each other? The answer is yes. And are the corners now matching? And the answer is yes. Now I spent a lot of time getting this so everything is squared up. But it's really fragile right now. It wants to relax back out to where it used to be. And I want to change that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave this folded over. And when I handle it, I'm going to handle it holding the two layers so it's got a little more structure to it and things aren't going to move. I want to move the shortest distance possible to going over to my iron. So wherever you're blocking your fabric, your ironing board and your iron should be really close by. Now as I set this up here, again I have my iron on the hottest setting possible and lots of steam. So what I'm doing here is I'm just pressing downwards and I'm telling all of those grains to settle down and stay in the location that they're in. But be really careful, we're not going to crease the edge here, so leave this rounded. You also want to let this cool off. So what I'll do is I'll put my hands on here, and your hand will quickly soak up the heat, and it's cooling off in place, and this is setting the grains. Now again, I'm going to handle this by holding both layers, and I want to bring this to the center, and I'm going to unfold this, and I'm going to press going downwards, so I'm not moving the iron across. Everything is going straight down. Again, I'm going to use my hands to soak up the heat. And I'm letting this cool off flat before I move it. So what I'll do is I'll fold this in half so it's 2 layers thick. I'll bring it here to the tabletop. And then we can come back in here and check the balance again. So I'm going to bring the center of this to meet up with the center of that. And most important, I want this edge here to be parallel with that edge there. So I'm first of all looking to make sure that these edges are parallel. That's my #1 priority. Then my second priority is, did these 2 marks align? And if yes, that's good. And is it parallel here and the corners are meeting here as well? And the answer is yes. So this piece here happens to be perfectly blocked and everything is good to go. What I want to do is I'm going to just steam it one more time. And I'm going to do it from the opposite side. So I'm going to flip this over. And again, everything I'm doing is going just straight down. I want these grains to cool off before I handle it. Now that it's cooled off, I'm going to just press this side one more time as well. Now, one of the cool things, if you're working at a design studio, usually they'll have a huge iron press. And what you could do is you could put your block up on there and just press the whole thing all in one shot, let it cool off. It has like a steam and heat, and then it'll switch to cold air and it'll blow it cold, and it'll all come out beautiful, pressed, clean, cooled, ready to handle. Now, so I'm going to take this off the table, and you can tell that I've spent a lot of time letting it cool off by how much it's standing up off of the form right here, because all of these grains have cooled off and it's really holding its structure really well. So far I've finished blocking out some muslin for my front and back bodice. And what I like to do when I'm handling this, I'll keep the paper pattern with it. That way you know which muslin is which. But also the paper gives this some stability. And when I carry it, I'm going to carry it holding from the bottom. And this way nothing's going to stretch out and it won't lose that block that you just did. Alright, so what I want to do is I'm going to just show you here at 5 times speed all of the sequence of events. So pull one thread off of all 4 sides, and then you're going to want to come in and you're going to want to press all of the edges flat and clean. And once you have all the edges flat, then you can start moving into the muslin and get some of the wrinkles all the way through. Then we'll come down to the tabletop. We want to take the length grains, mix them parallel, check the corners to see which way it needs to be blocked. On this piece, I only needed to block one of the corners. Everything else was good to go. Now I'm pressing straight down to tell these new grain positions to stay where they're at without ironing across. I want to come back and double check my length grain. Since this piece is so large, I'm also checking the cross grains and making sure that they're square. Everything was good to go, so I'm just steaming it and pressing it, and I'll get it here in the middle. And then I came back to the tabletop one more time just to check those grains. Everything looks good, but I noticed there's still some bumps in the middle, so I just want to press those downwards, let them cool off, and now we're finished. And then one last thing is, for your paper patterns, if they have some wrinkles and stuff on them, you can iron your pattern. What I would do is, this is the side that has all of my pencil on here, and this side doesn't really have much at all, it just has the one line. So I'm going to iron this from the back side. What I want is, I want the iron on low. So basically what I'm going to do now is I'm just turning my iron off completely. You also want to turn steam off completely. And right now the iron itself is actually a little bit too hot. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to cool it off by just ironing on my board first. Just to cool the iron itself off. And then I can come in here and I can prep my pattern piece. And you won't be able to press out all of the really deep wrinkles, but you will notice that this does flatten your paper out nicely. And then the edges will want to curl up on you, but if you get this to cool off flat by letting your hands soak up the heat from the iron, then you'll notice that your pattern piece doesn't curl up, it stays nice and flat. And then I can put this here with the muslin that I just blocked for it. I'll fold this in half, and when I handle it, I'll carry this from the bottom. Now that we've blocked out our front and back bodice, as well as the sleeve, go ahead and take a picture of this as part of the assignment. Go ahead and move those off to the side. And what I'm going to do is, I want to have you practice one more thing before we get started on cutting these out. Take out your muslin and your 18-inch sewing ruler. And what I want you to do is come in here along your length grain, and I want you to tear off a piece that is going to be 5 inches wide into the width and 18 inches long going with the length. Now this piece of fabric here, what we're going to do is, you can't really block it out, but let's clean up all the edges and press it all nice and flat and clean. Now let's just pretend that I blocked this out and it's all nice and perfect and all the grains are totally straight. What we need to do on our pattern pieces is we want to draw the center grain, the horizontal balance line, onto our muslin. But what you don't want to do is, you don't want to just take a ruler and just start drawing on top, because now all of a sudden you might not be going perfect with the grain. So instead of using a ruler and a pencil, we're going to do what's called a pin pull. Take out your tape, your sewing ruler, and your dressmaker pins. If you have these are the size 17 dressmaker steel pins. What you're going to do is, I want you to take your ruler and tape it down to the tabletop. And take out a pin, of course. And what we're going to do is, we're going to use our pin to draw a straight line on this piece of fabric. Now the advantage of the pin is because it's super sharp, it's going to go right in between two threads for the full distance. Now at first it's kind of tricky. As a beginner, your pin might end up skipping over some threads and you'll see it kind of moves around a little bit. But with practice, you can get to a point where you can draw a perfect straight line all the way through. Something that's important is you don't want to hold the fabric and move the pin. What you want to do is you want to hold the pin and move the fabric. But as you move the fabric, it needs to keep traveling in a straight line. And that's what the ruler's for. So watch me first. What I'm going to do is somewhere around here in the middle of the fabric is where I want the pin. But I need to hold the fabric and pull this. So I have to have some room here for my thumb at the top. Then I can put the pin in somewhere below that. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the fabric away from me, watching this ruler here to make sure that I'm going away from myself in a straight line. And I'll keep my pin just anchored in one spot the whole time. Now I've gotten to a point where this hand is so far away, I need to bring it back. So I can bring it back somewhere where I've already done the pin pull, and I can continue holding this. Now something else that's important to notice is if you notice where my thumb and finger are holding the fabric and my pin, those are in the same along the same line. So for instance, I'm not holding off to the corner here, but trying to do a pin pull in the middle here. So again, you would have your fingers exactly holding the fabric where your pin is pulling, and you're following this ruler to make sure that you're pulling straight away from yourself. And as a beginner, for me, what I like to do is I'll actually come down, I'll look at the line and I can see all the grains in the fabric, all the individual threads, and I can see that my pin went perfectly in between two threads. Now if your pin skipped some threads, it might be because you're pulling at an angle. And then you'll notice it will kind of skip over a few threads as it's moving and maybe even skip back a few threads. So that's if you're holding it in the wrong spot or if you're pulling at some weird angle, not straight away from yourself. So go ahead and do a few practice pulls. I'll do another one with you right now. So I'm going to hold this here off to one side. I'll have my pin right where my thumb and finger are holding. And then I'll pull the fabric away from me, looking at the ruler. The whole time I'm doing this, I'm looking right here. Now also as you do this, you'll notice your pin gets completely bent, and that's fine. You have to hold this really tight as the fabric is pulling away, and basically each pin pull that you do, your pin itself will be ready for the trash can. Now for those of you who are taking my class, what I want you to do is do this several times as a beginner to really get used to doing a pin pull and having it go in a perfect straight line. And then put your pin here in the middle of the fabric and take a picture of this so I can see that you've done it several times and you've finished one of your pins and this is now going to be ready for the trash. Now go ahead and throw this in the trash, and then what I want you to do is we're going to press this all beautiful and flat and clean again. Be sure to let it cool off on your ironing board before you handle it. And come back down here to the tabletop. So what I want you to do now is we are going to do one more pin pull. And I want you to start from exactly the middle of the top of this. So come over here, and what we're going to do is we're going to fold this in half and make sure you're finding exactly the half of it. So just double check on both sides that yes, you folded it in half. And then let's mark that with pencil. Now this is going to be the starting point for doing just one perfect pin pull. So taking your pin, put your thumb right there, and have your pin right at that pencil line, and start pulling this fabric away from you. Keeping the pin in the same location, and your eye is looking at the edge of the ruler. Now when you get to the other end here, what I want to do is fold this in half lengthwise so you can compare if yours is a straight line. And what you could do is line up the raw edges on both sides and make the ends here parallel. And then we can come in and we can see this is the pin pull that I just did, and it's lining up with the other side. Now you have to be really honest with yourself. I'm not going to be there to double check your work, but just make sure that yes, everything is squared up and this matches perfectly. But if it's off by quite a bit, then you'll know somewhere in your pin pull it was skipping over threads and you still need to practice some more. Now if you like the pin pull that you did and you feel like it's very accurate and everything's good to go, then come into that pin pull and put some dots right inside where that pin was dragging through the fabric. And what we're going to do is we're going to connect these. Now something that you want to be really careful of is it's going to be tempting to start at the top, line up my ruler at the bottom, and just draw a straight line. Done. But the part you're missing is the grain of the fabric is slightly moving around a little bit. So what we need to do is we need to connect the dots. And basically I've drawn dots about every 2 inches. So I'm going to start here at the top, and I'm going to connect to that first dot, and then to the second one, and then to the third one and fourth one, and so on. And sometimes you can see, hey, my ruler's just going in a straight line the whole way, but sometimes you see you have to slightly move your ruler. But basically what's going on is 2 different things. You're connecting perfectly right in between 2 threads, and then maybe your block is just slightly off block, and that's why maybe it had just a little twist to it. Now if this was blocked out perfectly and you came in, you put your dots in there, you'll notice that your ruler will basically just line up the full distance. Done. Now using the pin pull method is a great way to get a nice clean straight line that also matches the grain of your fabrics. Using a pin pull, I would do this basically like 75% of the time when I'm trying to draw a line inside a fabric. If I'm draping and moving a little bit quicker, and I know that later on I'm going to go back and fix something as needed, it is possible to go ahead and just do a pull with your pencil. But keep in mind that this would be more of an advanced method, and it's kind of a risky move, because as your pencil is going through, if you mess up, now you just drew in pencil on your fabric and you can't really erase it. But what I'll do is I'll show you how to do that now. So you would need to have your pencil as sharp as you could possibly get it. So for me, on my pencil sharpener, I have it on the sharpest potential, right? And what you'll do is you'll come in here and you'll have your location where you need to do a pin pull. And you can do it with your sharp pencil. What I'm going to do is I'm going to treat it the same way I did with my pin, where the pencil is my anchor and I'm going to move the fabric away. And I'm going to make sure I'm following along the edge of a ruler. But when you're doing this, you have to really hold that pencil steady and push down tight. And as you go, your lead might even break and you might have to sharpen it again. But let's go ahead and give it a shot. So wherever your thumb is here holding the fabric, that's where your pencil will be. Now once I got to the end here, my pencil was getting kind of dull and I could feel that it was almost wanting to start skipping over threads. So when you use this technique, you can do it for a short distance. If you have to do this for a long distance, like for instance you're setting up to do a ball gown and you want to get a center front down several yards, then just keep sharpening your pencil and pick up from where you left off, sharpen your pencil, and keep going. So go ahead and try this as well with a sharp pencil. Now that you've done it once with a pin and then marking it with pencil, and then you did it a second time with a sharp pencil, I want you to bring a ruler in here and have your pencil here on this side and your bent pin over here on this side. And take a picture of this for me as well as part of doing the assignment for the video. For this photo, what I want you to do is take a photo going down the fabric. And it's easier for me to see if your lines were skipping over grains. And again, I have the ruler set up so it's matching the straight line from my pin pull and the straight line from my pencil. Alright, so now that you've blocked out your front and back bodice plus the sleeve, in the next video we're going to start cutting these out and get ready to start sewing.